Hey, welcome back to part 2 of One Point Perspective Cityscapes. In this shorter video, we're just going to focus on some finishing touches and a little bit of shading. A lot of times when you're drawing using 1 point, 2 point, or 3 point perspective, you're drawing in a realistic way, but you're drawing something that you can't see, something that's not in front of you. You're not drawing from life. So you have to make up the shadows. You have to make up a little bit of that shading based upon your own experiential knowledge, the shading that you've done before, possibly from and hopefully from observation. Let's get started. Beginning on the right side of the street, we'll go ahead and start another building, our third building, with a vertical line. I think I want this building to be shorter than the first two, just for variety. I'm going to go ahead and use a line from the vanishing point to chop this building off about halfway up the vertical that I originally drew. And that's going to be the street side to this building. Now what we're essentially doing is drawing a lot of boxes attached to each other. And I'm going to go ahead and draw a skinny box on the front of this third building. You can see I've drawn a small horizontal line and a longer vertical line. And I'm going to use my vanishing point to draw lines away from the vanishing point at each of the tips of these two lines and the corner, the right angle where this small horizontal and vertical meet. And that's going to give me a skinny box, skinny like a Hershey bar, attached to the top of this building, just to break its side up so that it's not completely flat from top to bottom. As you can see, I've added a second building to the side on the right. This one will be taller than the third building that we drew, the first building on the right side of our street. This building is starting out just like the first two, except I'm going to alter it as well. Similar to the building that we just drew here in the beginning of this tutorial, I'm going to add a detail, an architectural element that wraps around the top of this building. And we're actually going to take this building up even higher, completely off the page. And this small detail that we've added will simply separate the bottom segment of the building from a top or a middle segment of a building. We don't know how high this building goes. Maybe it's a skyscraper. That same kind of skinny box that I've added, I'll add a piece of the same kind of detail above the second segment. Don't forget that little horizontal line that creates the alleyway between the two buildings that we've just drawn in this part 2 of our 1 point perspective cityscape tutorial. Alright, using my vanishing point, I'm drawing a few lines to create a bank of or a series of windows on the street side of this third building. And I will separate the windows out from these diagonal lines with a set of verticals. Just remember, not only should our windows be getting taller as they get closer to us, but also wider. So you'll need to spread out the distance between these verticals as you go. Now this is sort of a fantasy street scene. It doesn't represent a real street, of course, and I just want the buildings to appear to continue down the street and over the horizon. The farther we get from our foreground, the less detail we'll see in these buildings until they really just become little lines, tiny little lines that get shorter as we go. These diagonal edges to the tops of our buildings are all pointed toward the vanishing point. No windows on these buildings, in the background, they're just too small. See, they're detailless shapes and then eventually just lines. Alright, now we have added windows to 3 buildings so far. And you can add windows to this taller building, this skyscraper. You can follow along with the video and add the same number of windows in as I do, or you can add in your own windows, whatever size that you'd like or number of windows that you'd like. The drawing gets pretty small as we get into the middle ground. You just have to be careful. Make sure your vertical edges stay vertical, remain parallel with one another, and that the windows gradually get larger the farther they are from the vanishing point. There we go. I believe my sidewalk is a little too tall. I'm not too worried about scale relationships here, but the sidewalk seemed thick compared to the width of the street. So I just moved up the bottom edge of the sidewalk's lines to make them flatter or thinner. And I've decided that my dresses in the storefront on the building across the street were too big. Too big compared to the sidewalk and the street. Again, I'm not looking for perfection in terms of scale. I'm really just trying to follow the rules of one-point perspective to create a somewhat believable space, but I went ahead and made those dresses and mannequins slightly smaller. Alright, so my light is going to come in from the right. That means any building's side that faces the left needs to be in shadow. Don't be afraid to shade all the way across your building sides, across the windows and doors. Just mush it all together in the shadows. That's what happens in shadows. The details become obscured. Usually during the day, windows appear to be darker. Light inside of a building is never as strong as the sunlight and can't compete. So I'm just going to shade in the windows on the buildings slightly darker than whatever value, whatever lightness or darkness the buildings themselves are. So the building on the left that I'm working on is light gray, so the windows just need to be darker than that. The buildings on the right side of our page are medium gray, so their windows just need to be darker than that. Any flat side that faces down towards the ground, I want to make a little bit darker as well, since light typically falls from above. And because there is typically more detail up close, I'm going to add or better describe the facade of this building that has the storefront window with dresses. I'm going to go ahead and add in some blocks like it's a stone building. Just note that my blocks are made of vertical lines and lines that come from the vanishing point. These horizontal edges of these blocks are not parallel to one another, but rather they gradually change in terms of the direction they travel according to the vanishing point as we work from the bottom to the top of the building. I'm going to throw in some lightness and darkness in our storefront. I don't want to be too sharp or too crisp in there because we are supposed to be looking through a window. It shouldn't be entirely clear. I've added some shading just to help separate the light colored dresses from their background. And then I'm going to do some reflective shading. I'm just going to throw in some lighter patches and some darker patches into this window that keep it from being too clear. In fact, we want it to look like it is clear, but that it's picking up maybe reflections from the other side of the street. So I've added some dark patches. Remember, we're just making this up. And I'm going to throw in some light streaks with my eraser. Don't forget to shade the vertical edges of your sidewalk. And that brings us to the conclusion of our cityscape in one-point perspective. Put these rules into practice, and draw anything you can imagine. Thanks for watching.